Cool. Good morning, everybody. How are you? Good morning. It's a beautiful day in Santa Fe. A little nice warmer than what it was for me earlier in the week. I was in Iowa. It was awfully cold. I arrived when it was -5, and with the wind chills, I think it was -15. It helped me appreciate Santa Fe quite a bit. So I'm glad always to be here. This. I think it's one of those days when you're mayor of a community that you can feel some excitement over. Whenever there's new ways of looking at traditional practices with an eye focused on how can we do things better and improve the not only the governance structure, but the quality of life of our community. And so I'm hoping that today begins and continues a conversation that we started a year ago when we kicked off this public conversation about whether or not we could or should pursue a public bank in Santa Fe. Before I begin, I want to acknowledge a personal friend who we lost over this past year, Craig Barnes, who I remember very specifically was the individual shortly after I got elected and came in and said, there's a lot of hopes for you, but we have a lot of expectations, and being able to think outside the box and take on new ways of looking at things is something that a lot of the community wants to see come out of you. And I said, great, I'm ready to do it. What do you think? He says, I think Santa Fe needs a public bank. And I was a little bit taken aback because it seemed like a lot to grasp or to bite off. But he shared with me the importance of, when it comes to the public treasury, that having transparency and certainly understanding that there was better ways to use the public treasury to advance our own needs in our community, that there were things that needed to be considered, and that certainly a public bank was something to look at. So I want to acknowledge the work that he did with the We Are People campaign, and for his efforts over the course of this past year to help educate the public on the benefits of having a public bank. And of course, we, shortly after that conversation, we launched the discussion because we wanted to see if in fact it was feasible, if there was a path forward, if we could find a way to make a public bank work. Like so many communities, we've struggled to bounce back fully from this great recession that we had. Even today, our economy is not generating revenues at the pre-2008 levels, and we're still dealing with the budget deficit left over from those tough times. But when we put our money into international banking systems, we're not seeing the local investment in our community and in our people that could generate big returns financially, but more importantly, socially as well. Local businesses, local infrastructure, local people. Locally, these are my priorities and the priorities of the city. But today's financial system has no interest in investing in them. Small business lending from the biggest 4 banks was down more than 50% from when we first started this discussion. So in challenging times, we need creative, innovative solutions. From early childhood education to broadband internet infrastructure, public banking holds out the possibility that we can invest Santa Fe's money in Santa Fe, not in Wall Street. So there was no question in my mind that this was an issue worthy of our time and our careful consideration. I said then, and I still believe, that this is something that we have to pursue, but pursue very carefully, very deliberatively. Katie Updike, who's with me today, has done an outstanding job for all of us on this study, and she's going to spend a little bit of time talking in detail about the results. But what we found is that in some form, a public bank is feasible in Santa Fe. And certainly now is the time to set a course for how we actually get there. Now that doesn't mean that we're going to go out tomorrow and get a charter or apply for a charter. And again, I want to emphasize that we have to be deliberate. We have to make sure that we're methodical, that there is full participation by this community, which includes the banking community, in the conversation to determine what a public bank would look like and in what form it would take its place in our community. Integration and improvements in financial policy and practice, leveraging better relationships with local lending institutions, encouraging new modes of lending, and building a better regional financial system are all a start of what we can look to as we go forward. Where we go after that is a question that we will work with the City Council and the public to address. This has been a very public process so far, from that all-day symposium at the Community Convention Center that launched this conversation, to the public meetings that moved the resolution forward to study it, to the pages of the op-ed section of our local papers. And we want to maintain, as we go forward, that same level of engagement and transparency. So today we're releasing this report to the public for their review, for their feedback, and for their comments. I'm also going to take it to my fellow councilors, and together we will sit down and take a look at what comes next for our city's push towards a public bank. And I certainly want to make sure that we're able to incorporate the public's comments in that area. So before I turn it over to Katie to be able to go over the summaries of the report and some of the recommendations, I think it's important to reiterate a couple of things. We know that through smart management of a treasury, a local treasury, that we can assure that the public understands the transparency that goes into how the money is invested, that the money can be used, the treasury can be used in ways that enable local banks to be able to participate more in lending to local businesses and local people, and that there is a better way to manage the treasury than just to turn it over to some of the national banks who have no interest in investing in the financial health of our community. And knowing that there isn't a prohibition from our city developing a public bank, I think we need to continue to step forward and to see how far we go as a community in determining what, if any, type of public bank would come to be. And I also want to reiterate that this next step forward is going to be this continuation of a very slow and methodical way of addressing what a public bank would look like in our community, and that tomorrow we're not going to go out and file an application to charter a bank. That this is a conversation that's going to continue to happen, an exploration of ideas from the community, a conversation with the City Council to see if they're ready to go towards that next step. And again, certainly a conversation with our community, including our business and our banking community, so that they can weigh in on what they're willing to support and be a part of. So with that, I'll turn it over to Katie, and then to go over some of the summary of the report, and then we will answer questions both from the press and the community if you feel like you have some. So, Katie.
Thank you very, very much. It really has been quite a privilege and fascinating to work on this. And so for that, I thank you. Public banking has really been a concept that's been revived since the 2008 financial crisis. And it reflects the concerns that many of our communities across the country have had of increased regulation, concerns over speculation, the controls, but mostly over a loss of financial control in our local community. And so it's a topic that, frankly, most of us don't fully understand, even though we interact with the financial system every single day, whether it's through credit cards or our banks or in the way we get payments made to vendors. And quite candidly, there's a very wide range of opinions as to what public banking is. Even though the public sector has always had a role directly or indirectly through regulation in our financial system, partly because it's an important part of our economy. It's what kind of makes the wheels turn. And with that wide range of understanding and opinion, it all of a sudden dawned on us we couldn't do a feasibility study if we didn't imagine what it might look like. And so what we had to do is we had to kind of look at what the national landscape was and what the regional economic and financial landscape was, and what the internal financial condition and operations of the city, the municipality was. And Oscar Rodriguez and Helene Hausman probably were tired of all the questions that I had on that score, but were very, very helpful. And so it was with that kind of generosity of spirit, time, and opinion, as it was shared with us, that we accessed over 200 voices in the community. And I see Simon over there. The Chamber of Commerce weighed in. And the voices were everywhere from wildly enthusiastic to skeptical to, shall we say, less supportive. But what was interesting is that everyone was willing to provide technical insight, political insight, regulatory insight, including the regulators. And you know, Kate Noble and Ross Cheney helped me navigate some of those, because even though I live here, I've not grown up in Santa Fe, and so some of those shoals are difficult for a relative newcomer. But as we developed a more concrete idea, and in the report it's called a straw man, I think, for lack of a better word. I think I was told it maybe should be called a straw person, but that's okay. Maybe not a PC. But in any event, what we found is there was remarkable unanimity and support on two areas. One is if we could strengthen what the mayor talked about, the transparency and functioning of the financial sector. And with that, really working hand in glove with Oscar was incredibly helpful. And more importantly, helping strengthen the overall financial sector in Santa Fe. And I have to say that the financial sector throughout the country, after the 2008 financial crisis, but now more importantly with a lot of the financial technologies that continue to bring new tools into the financial sector. Just think of Airbnb now in the financial sector through peer-to-peer lending and Kickstarters, and so that whole sector in and of itself is changing. Makes us wonder, what do we need to do here in Santa Fe to make sure we have a robust financial community? I'd like to echo the mayor's thanks to the Banking on New Mexico, many of whose faces I see here, but also to the Public Banking Institute nationally, because communities around the country are addressing this issue very often in their own ways, in their own community, and being able to hear what's going on nationally was very helpful. Thank you. I also want to mention Chris Erickson at the Arrowhead Center at NMSU. Chris was the economist, I should say Dr. Christopher Erickson, was the economist who helped keep our study grounded in real New Mexico economics. The Arrowhead Center has done research on any number of topics, including taxation and economic investment mechanisms. More importantly, he's a well-known skeptic. And so he was my grounding throughout the research in what we were thinking about and trying to develop. The mayor highlighted a couple of things. One was to increase transparency in the city financial mechanisms. I'd like to emphasize another point that he mentioned, and that was working with the financial sector. The city's deposits, give or take 200 million, have a big influence in our financial markets, or could. And so part of this ongoing dialogue is how to make sure our city deposits have the greatest potential influence. And one of the recommendations in the report is that as we move from analyzing feasibility into thinking about how we implement, is to really engage with some of the other public entities in addition to the financial institutions to see how we all work together, and specifically thinking of the school district and the county. We have roughly the same citizens, taxpayers, and making sure that we're working cooperatively and making our economy work as efficiently as it can is exciting. And so really what the report talks about is feasibility. We think it's feasible. We suggested implementation, but now is when we suggested implementation steps, but now is when the city's really looking at the opportunity of moving into implementation steps. And during implementation, a good process develops refinements to the process. And so really and I think the city hopes that as the report is out there, there's lots of feedback in helping the city develop a real implementation program. The mayor asked me to cover just quickly a couple of the findings or suggested steps in the report. The first step was really to continue Oscar's Rodriguez's, the financial manager's, steps to streamline and make more efficient and transparent the internal treasury function, whether we call it an internal banking function or something like that. That really allows the city to develop some of the policies and procedures that it has to have in hand in order to think about a formal bank. Banking charters require those kinds of things. It also gives the city the opportunity to begin to more formally reach out to its other public sector players like the school district and the county to see how much they want to engage in thinking through such a process. As that develops, we'll see whether and how a charter might look. That's the recommendation. There are various approaches to that could be taken that I think will emerge. And then over the long run, what this also involves is what are the policies that we have when we deposit monies with the city. The city's already suggested that there are changes to its collateral policy that may help the banks on lend. So keeping that dialogue ahead is very exciting. But with that, I guess what I'd really like to return to is how grateful I am for the opportunity to have done this. Thank you.